Right, 28 past 10. John, g'day, good morning.
G'day. You're also talking about capital gains tax, aren't you?
Yes, certainly are, mate. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, Keith Sinclair, in his history of New Zealand, he had a chapter on red Feds and Cow Cockies. That was the title.
Yes.
And I think that when the smoke clears, this chapter will be called Property Investors and Progressives. And
Probably.
because it's been a major factor of since the 1990s, and the thing is that asset inflation isn't wealth creation; it simply transfers the charge from the property investor to the first home buyer or renter. And I went to a property seminar in the 1980s in the Christchurch Town Hall, and there was Dolph DeRue's, and there were 500 people there, and people walking around with glazed eyes. You know, they were going to escape their boring lives and retire in canal homes in Brisbane and so on. But the thing is, it worked. If you had to be smart enough, and you had to have the sort of go-getter personality. And for a lot of people, it was a lot of people considered it antisocial, anti-community to think like that. Sort of
to buy houses?
Well, to just that to be profiting from house inflation.
Somewhere you need to live. Yeah, well, it is a strange thing, isn't it? Because you think about it, we need houses to live as families, don't we? To bring up kids and so forth. But they've become an investment tool now. So when I grew up with my parents, they bought the house that I lived in for most of my life I think they paid $55,000 for it, which might have been 2 or 3 times Dad's income, and they sold it all these years later for about $290,000 or something, which seems like nothing, right? But $50,000, like nowadays. We've got 12 times the income. It's simply gone unaffordable, and that's why there will be a whole class of New Zealanders for the rest of their lives and for the lives of their kids and their kids. They'll never own a home. We're going to get used to that now. There's no point in. They won't break out of it.
It's just sad because, we got these friends. So they're just working class, but they're Japanese migrants, and they're sort of stuck in a property that's like, I think it's a sort of semi-detached sort of flat thing, and I think it's 2 bedrooms, or it might be 3 bedrooms. But they had a young boy and a girl in together, and they really, I mean, those people, they came here for the New Zealand lifestyle. I had someone come years ago in the 1980s, and I had this lovely garden and so on. And anyway, I had a Japanese couple family come and stay with me, the parents and a daughter with a baby, or 2-year-old. And she played on the lawn, and when she got back to Japan, they said that as she got into the apartment, she cried.
Yes, Mr. Lawn.
It's such a prison, and it really cheeses me off, all these, these progressives who want to they're talking about Auckland and this apartment is, or this 21 homes go where there were 2 homes sort of thing, and they see that as a great achievement, and they say it's close to bus stops and it's close to shops, so you can get on the bus and you can go somewhere. Where the hell are you going to go,
Well,
it's really sad.
Places like Auckland doesn't have a culture of public transport. They have to jam it down our throats, so they're putting these massive car parks where the buses leave from. People do jump on them, but people love their cars in Auckland. It's always been a car culture because it's such a vast city that the buses can't get you there, mate. They just can't get you there, and the rest of the country doesn't have the population. Wellington's the only place where public transport really works.
Yeah, well, even in the 1950s in Christchurch, half the population used to cycle, but that would have been, of course, because cars were expensive, partly. But it was just the the mass of cyclists meant that everyone it's like having sheep on the road. You just had to be careful when you drove, you know. But yeah, we had half the population back then, and half the people cycled, but we had the same number of parks, the same number of beaches. It's all just a big rip-off. And,
if you've got a better... No, it's a hoax. I mean, those places, and I've looked at those places, and I live in Auckland, and I see, everywhere I look, I see 45 houses where there once was one, and I just think it's like a compound. You could launch a war from those sort of places. It's like a compound, especially the three-level ones. My mate builds homes for a reputable New Zealand company. It's been around forever. And he said, stay away from the three-bedroom ones, from the three-level ones, the three levels, because basically you just got sets of stairs. You're living on stairs. And the other thing is they're not body corporates, you see. They're and so you can do what you like with them. So people have washing out the front and the three cars out the front of the other, and it becomes a hovel, becomes a ghetto.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And you won't see these in Epsom. You won't see them in Epsom. They're only in, Avondale, Mount Albert, places like that, and they're going up every day.
I know, it's just disgusting. And what annoys me is, as I was saying, like property investors and progressives, Bishop can go on about it, how he's solving the housing crisis, and you won't hear any opposition from the mainstream media.
Well, he could go and live in one of those places, tell me what it's like. Go and take your family into one of those, Chris. You look at the MPs. You look at the MPs' property holds. You look at what the MPs own, okay? And I've been through this stuff for years. And all the MPs own standalone houses. They own farms. They own commercial buildings. Very few of them own little apartments. The apartments they do own is because they need to live in them for their tax reasons and for the reasons that they can get it paid off by the taxpayer. You see, so they own them in Wellington or whatever. Very few of them own little townhouses. They own houses because that's where you want to bring your family up. Who wants to bring your family up in a box? No one.
Exactly. Yeah, and all the when they do studies of sort of housing people prefer and so on, overwhelmingly people want to live with nature. Of course, doesn't mean to say that they can or want to live in the middle of the jungle, but they do want nature around them, and they prefer cities less than 250,000 people. Well, that's about the maximum city that they want. In other words, they want perhaps somewhere like Timaru that's got the ocean and it's got all the facilities, but it's not so big that... I mean, Christchurch used to be like that. One thing I used to like about it, when I went overseas and I come back, and I was kind of looking, and all these houses are single level. And the other thing is, though, that you could always leave Christchurch in just a short drive, pretty much, and you're out in the countryside. And now that's filling up. You go down Shands Road
Christchurch has got some excellent buildings, though. They've got those low-level apartments. They're well built and they're spacious.
Yeah.
They've got good designers. They haven't done it on the cheap. Maybe now they are, but they've done some really good stuff there. And Auckland's just trashy. We're a trashy Asian city.
Yes, I think so too. And, they need places like for elderly and so on. I mean, I don't need I'm elderly, and I don't need how old are you, John? Three-bedroom house, but 72. But where would you 60? I'm going to go out and paint soon. But but where would you go? And I mean, like Paul Spoonley was saying that to Damien Grant, that we could solve the housing crisis if he said that the baby boomers are hoarders and blockers. They block things like superannuation and that. But I mean, that's a matter of social contract. And, well, it's an intergenerational thing. And, on that matter, I sort of think that just bad luck. You get less superannuation if they can't afford it. But
super doesn't cover it anyway. I was speaking to a former teacher at the weekend, and she's on New Zealand Super. She's her first year of retirement in the last 12 months, And it doesn't go anywhere near covering the cost of living. So she's back working a day a week, and all sorts of things. And you have to.
Yeah, well, what Spoonley was suggesting reminds me of Dr. Zhivago, where he comes back and there's a whole lot of people living in his house.
Yeah, I know what it's like.
Yeah. Well, it's just ridiculous.
But this is why there'll be no capital gains tax in New Zealand. Yeah, but there'll be no capital gains tax in New Zealand because we shafted on all fronts. Our power prices are too high. Our cost to build is through the roof. Our banking fees are higher than Australia. Our interest rates are high. There's a percentage that's higher than Australia because we're owned out of Australia. So all these things, our economy is not big enough, right? We're the size of Western Sydney. So all these things, we're not big enough as economies of scale. And also, we're like sheep. We line up to get shafted. We line up. I see it everywhere I go. And so all those things, our rates have gone up 25%. All these things go. New Zealanders can't keep putting up with this. We can't afford it. Something's going to break, and it's breaking now.
Yeah, and I think it's because we're so small also, there's not enough media outlets, because over in the UK, for instance, you have GB News. They just don't seem to, apart from the platform, you don't seem to be able to have a say. You've got to get yourself on council or...
Yep.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. But very good, John. Have we solved the world's problems? Hey?
Yeah. I think definitely. The political system is a setup.
Yep, and it's not going to change. This government is more free market than the last national government. This Luxon guy, he's a hands-off man. He comments on collapses. He comments about them. Oh, look at that over there. Yet he was on the end of two big bailouts. Big bailouts with New Zealand. Like $1 billion, remember that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, the politics flows from the universities. The Green Party and so on, and of course we don't have unions and so on. So there's sort of no base no intellectual base where those things are going to emanate up. They're just going to come from the universities, or they're going to come from vested interests, like the Property Council and those sort of people.
There's a whole lot of. I went to a university graduation recently. My goodness, there's a whole lot of waffle courses that are going on there. I don't know how these people are going to get jobs to get on in life, but they've just paid all this money for this degree. That good luck getting a job with that. I've seen some of the waffle coming out of the universities. We need to get back to some basics. Some employable things, not some waffle.
Yeah, and I think also these days the standards at university don't seem to be very high. If you got a PhD, it perhaps applies to STEM subjects, but otherwise, like back in from about the 1980s, if you went to university, you had to be pretty bright, and if you got a
not now
PhD, it meant something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's all sorts of people. You see them on Martin Duhar's web page.
Go for a drive through the university. Go through any town, have a look at them. It's not what it used to be. Hey, I better take some more calls. John, I appreciate it, mate. I appreciate it. Look after yourself.
Okay.
Good on you. Good on you for caring.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay, take you, mate. 18 away from 11. Duncan, pull in health and safety. I agree. As that alone has added massive cost to all forms of building.
This is from Q&A. 3rd of July 2016. Let's move on to the issue of immigration. Kerry MacDonald, who's a preeminent New Zealand businessman, for many years Comelco managing director, he wrote in a piece on his website just recently, he said, immigration, and I quote, the high rate of immigration is a national disaster, he said. It's lowering the present and future living standards of New Zealanders by serious adverse economic, social and environmental consequences. Now, this isn't Winston Peters saying this. This is a respected economist and businessman who's worried about immigration, not because of who's coming here, but because we aren't able to cope with the numbers. John: OK, well, I don't think that the evidence bears that out. So for a start off, if you look at average wages in New Zealand over the last 10 years or so, or the 8 years that we've been in government, the average wage has risen 11,000 and wages have been rising faster than inflation. Corin: you don't want immigration to fall though, do you? I just want to say something. I saw you in a speech after the budget and you were speaking to a big room of business people, some of the biggest business minds in the country, and you stood up and you said, don't worry about Treasury's figure or estimation that it will go back to a trend of 12,000. You were confident it was going to be a lot higher than that. John: I just think it was unlikely it will go to 12,000.
You know how a lot of people talk about colonisation and, being colonised and the world was colonised and all sorts of things. I wonder if we're going through a really intense period right now of an economic colonisation, not by Pākehā New Zealanders, by others from overseas. No. And they're getting a real foothold in this country now. I don't have a problem with it. I do have a problem, though, if it affects the settings currently in New Zealand and we don't build alongside it and we don't, assimilate properly, because it causes massive issues down the track. But I wonder if there is... I mean, I think New Zealanders would be horrified to learn of how much land and how much capital and how much wealth... New Zealanders have and the stake they have in New Zealand. I think you find that New Zealanders are quite poor as a result.
Yes. Of course, those colonisers, using your term, Duncan, are very often Australians and Americans and Brits. So that continues a long pattern of buying up New Zealand property.
With the numbers of New Zealanders going overseas, and you look at them, and most of them went to Australia. You asked the question, wonder why they're leaving. They just don't see opportunity here anymore. Like my niece, she's 26 and she works at she's very smart and quite high up in a finance markets, capital markets sort of set up, like share brokers and things in town. She's done 5 years there. She'd worked from 10 in the morning till 2 in the morning, 5 days a week.
Wow.
And overseas, she would be paid 5 times what she's paid here. They're basically used as sort of market economic rats and rabbits running around this running track for 16 hours a day. They know a lot. They're very smart, but they're just buggered. They are exhausted. They're screwed. They're rooted. They just can't wait to go overseas and never come back. Now, I'm not saying that there are a lot of people like her, but there are a number.
Oh, no, but I think if you went through the health service, nurses, psychiatrists, surgeons, you'd find the same. They're working long hours. We do have a long hours culture, of course, of working in New Zealand. And there's always push and pull factors, Duncan. I mean, the push factors would be that you can't get a house here, you can't get a job with a decent salary here. The pull factors in Australia would be that you've got much more opportunity, higher salaries. But so there's always those push and pull factors. And the interesting thing is, it appears that the push factors and the pull factors for New Zealanders are very strong at the moment in terms of the other side of the Tasman. But we've got to acknowledge that the numbers coming to New Zealand are quite extraordinary. So we are very seen as being very attractive to a lot of people internationally.
Yeah. I mean, why would you work here in New Zealand for, say, $70,000? You just can't get above 70, 72, 74, 76. It drags on like that. When houses are 13 to 14 times that value, so you can never get into a house, you don't see a pathway. You're just used as a workie. We're told we're not productive. You've got long hours. Where's the stake in New Zealand? Where's your prize for working really hard? Where's your reward? You just see the country being flooded with immigrants and they get ahead. They do all sorts of things that we won't. And so they get ahead, and you're looking at your own position going, where's the payback for being a New Zealand citizen? Where's my standard of citizenship? What do I get in return for this? Why should I work so hard for my country? Why do I fly the flag?
Those are good questions. Can I just put a plug in for the immigrants? The other day I had surgery. The admitting nurse was South African, the theatre nurse was Filipino, the surgeon was Chinese, the anaesthetist was Indian, and the nurse that checked me out afterwards was Filipino. They were fantastic. That healthcare that I got the other day is just amazing. Without those immigrants, a lot of our systems would fall over, and when we encounter them in our systems, I think we see some really good people who are doing a great job.
This is from Campbell Live after the 2014 election. John Campbell, what do you want to be remembered for? John Key. Going back to that main point, I think it was Muldoon who famously said, I want to leave the country in no worse condition than I found it. Isn't that a low ambition? Yes, I want to leave the country in better condition than I found it, and if there's something I genuinely believe, it would be lifting our confidence to a certain degree about how we see ourselves in the world and what we think we are capable of achieving. Now, I think individually there is masses of ambition that sits out there, but can we actually take that and convert that to take the opportunity? And I always thought what was happening in the oppositional politics, of course, they would oppose national. That's their job, actually, apart from everything else. But it was a bit negative about our place in the world. So we played a bit about whether people coming here was a good or bad thing, whether people should invest here was a good or bad thing, or whether we have a trade agreement with parts of Asia was a good or bad thing. But actually, in my mind, the reason that I want to say yes to those things is because they are the opportunities that reflect our opportunities to both get wealthier, which is all about what you can do with that money, and then ultimately the opportunities for Kiwis. I'd like New Zealanders to feel, after my time as Prime Minister, they have become more confident, outward-looking nation, more multicultural.
The Reserve Bank did raise immigration as an issue yesterday, and we all know how cautious they are. We are looking at a net gain of about 5,000 to 6,000 a month. Are you comfortable with all of this?
Well, firstly, if you look at the speech the Reserve Bank gave, it'd be easy to overstate that part of it. There's about 3 paragraphs in it, and they themselves say migration could have at the margins some small impact. So they're not exactly arguing that that would dramatically change. Let's just go back to the point I made earlier. I mean, if you think through the logics of migration. Okay, so let's all agree we're not going to stop a Kiwi who's a citizen of this country coming back. Let's all agree that we're not going to stop Australians, because if we do have to stop Australians, then we've got to stop Kiwis going to Australia. We're not doing that. We're certainly not going to stop refugees that come to New Zealand. We're not going to stop people that come under the Pacific quota coming to New Zealand. So then you start getting down to 3 categories. One is students, and some of those numbers have been at the margins actually coming down a little bit, but that's an over $2 billion industry that employs lots of people. Then you've got working holiday programs, and if we stop students or young people coming on those, we've got to stop New Zealanders going on the reciprocal working holiday programs. I don't think we want to do that. So we are really left is the piece around skills. And the question then is, do we have those skills? So we've got a 5.2% unemployment rate. We've got skills shortages already turning up in certain areas. And if you take the point I was making yesterday, I mean, take someone like Extreme Boats in Whakatane, where Stephen Joyce was yesterday. My understanding is they've got a very full order book. They employ lots of people. They're in Whakatane. They're a great company and a great employer. Would we really stop them bringing in 2 or 3 welders to make sure that they can keep everybody else employed? I think that would be really pretty silly. So migration definitely goes in cycles, and you can overstate and panic about these things. It's reasonably high at the moment, but I listen to all the economists, including the Treasury and even the Reserve Bank, who tell us it'll be lower in time.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about. I mean, we've got Cameron Baggery tomorrow.
Yeah, Cameron, yeah.
So let's by all means talk about the New Zealand economy as well, and where it's going, and property. We'd like to talk a bit about. But tell us, particularly with your ANZ role and that sort of thing, and actually all those boards and advisory roles that you've got, a bit about the global economy, and talk to us about where you think that's all heading and what it's looking like, and. This is your thing.
Yeah, okay, so property, there's 3 things that drive property, I'm sure you all know this. So essentially, interest rates, jobs and migration. So they are the 3 big factors, and essentially why they're pretty much in that order is that if you go and borrow money to buy a house, just let's take residential for a moment, then pretty simply people go along and say, how much can I, they work backwards. Fundamentally, how much do I earn? How much can therefore I afford to pay? And let's say your mortgage is 2.5% at the moment, for one an argument. Then the banks actually chuck in their models much higher numbers, over double that. So they stress test themselves that you can afford it when rates go up a bit. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have quite a big impact. So when everybody runs around, by the way, and says, oh, it's terrible, house prices are going up, they don't really mean it. Okay, I know politicians say that all the time. They don't really mean it. I'll tell you why they don't mean it. What happens when house prices go up is you get what's called the wealth effect. And even though mum and dad, they borrow $500,000, they buy the house for the $1 million, it's worth $1 million, one day they wake up and go, whoa, 3 years later it's worth $1.5 million. They'll tell you how bad it is, but they go to Myrtle and they go, dear, we're worth $1 million, and they go out for dinner and they spend money. They really do. So yeah, okay, the pace of increase has been too high, but they still like it. So it's all about interest rates, and if you believe they're going to track up, they'll have some impact. Jobs, can people keep paying the mortgage? Migration is quite a big factor. So it has been, saying the blindly obvious, going crazy. So just to give you an example, what we call system growth, how much do the banks lend in residential? On average, that's $15 billion a year. Just to give you an example, in the last 12 months, it's been $30 billion. So ANZ, we're 1 in 3 home loans. We're the biggest in the country. And just to give you an example, September, October, November, December, just at ANZ, we lend $1 billion a month, just ANZ.
Wow.
So we're lending $15 billion a year now at the moment.
And that's to New Zealand or New Zealand and Australia?
No, just New Zealand.
Okay.
No, that's just New Zealand.
I sort of share those characteristics where, we can see that there's opportunity. We're not afraid to take it. And I think you've always had an interest in property, as indeed I have. I mean, it's always been a bit of a family joke. We'll go on holiday somewhere, and inevitably between the two of us, we're wanting to buy something.
Yeah, buy a house.
Buy a house, yeah. And whenever, without sharing the family secrets, whenever there's disagreement going on, the code frame to sort of, or the code word to end it all becomes, I like houses.
Yeah, I remember that. So,
yeah,
this is a bit of a running family joke. So every time there'd be like a little disagreement in the family and there might have been tension in the car, I'd always interrupt as a 6-year-old and go, I like houses.
I like houses. Let's go forward. Let's move on to a new topic.
Yeah. So as we all know, we're here today to talk about property. And so I guess a good place to start would be kind of our journey of how, I got into property and, kind of what led us to getting into business together and kind of going down this route. And see, I always tell people about the conversation. So I guess my history was I was at Jardin for a couple of years. I did a BCom, BProp at Auckland Uni. So I was always interested in the finance and the property sector. And I remember you sat me down, we're on an OE, we're sitting in Italy, and we talked about getting into business together and, kind of something that we could do as a family. And I guess what would be real great for the listeners is if you ran me through the what you told me about the 3 kind of different ways people have made money kind of through history. I think I found that really valuable.
Yeah. So I looked at it and said, well, if you go away and look at the rich list of, say, a country like New Zealand, it's really dominated by 3 lots of people. And I think that's true around the world. So the first is you just got a phenomenal talent at something. Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, you can name the people. And through that skill, they're an Adele, they're Elton John, they have a particular skill and they can monetize that to mind-blowing levels. And, that's out there. It's really difficult, and it's even more difficult in a country like New Zealand where, say, some of our most famous sports people are All Blacks, and they're, frankly, on a world scale, not paid that well for that.
Yeah.
So that was one way. The second way is they establish a business. So think of someone like a Rod Duke sets up Briscoe's.
Briscoe's, yeah.
He's been phenomenally successful, great retailer, made a ton of money on the rich list at $1 billion. And that is more, I want to say common because there's not a lot of rods out there. But again, if you look at it, there's a lot of those people that have invested in business done phenomenally well. But the third category is property, and it's not third in the rankings. In fact, At the moment, the Inland Revenue Department is going through a thing where they've gone to the 400 wealthiest New Zealanders, and in theory, I don't know how they work that out, we're on that list. And so they are going through a mountain of different questions about assets and trusts and who earns and all this sort of stuff. But what we hear why they're doing that is because they think that a lot of wealth has been created for those people through property.
Through property, yeah.
And so I just remember saying to you, well, look, you've got options. I mean, you could be a DJ, and you might be, Martin, whatever, Garrix.
Martin Garrix, yeah.
So, that may work, but it could be just a really tough life giving out pamphlets 2 a.m. in Berlin.
Yeah.
Or obviously you could be a finance person, or you could go and set up some other business, but you've got the kind of brain I always thought that worked well in property. We've got the advantage of a bit of capital to help seed that. And bluntly, New Zealanders love property. And I think the way that I would sort of characterise that is if the equivalent of KiwiSaver in the United States is a thing called the 401k plan. And if you go to a dinner party in New York, everyone spends the night talking about their 401k plan. They talk about what stocks you own, what's hot, what's cold, what penny ones have you bought, do you have Microsoft or Apple or Google, whatever. In New Zealand, you go to a dinner party, they just talk about what houses they own and what ones they want to buy.
The world today are relatively speaking, regionalised. So Middle East and North Africa to Europe, Latin America to the United States, but the dominant flow in Australia is from China and India. That's why I say the world is projecting success onto us. But I think within your day jobs, the consequences of that success are probably more profound than you've probably been thinking of, because imagine a world 10 or 20 years from now where that 28% becomes 33% nationally. Because that's what the population story is telling you. When Melbourne is the biggest city in Australia again, when we're trying to fit the next 16 million people, the majority of which will be migrants, which takes our population from 24 to 40 million, where they choose to live is not really going to be an issue for them, because relatively speaking, coming from China or in India, Melbourne and Sydney, if it's a little more crowded, a little more congested, a little more expensive, is still going to feel like paradise to them. But to the rest of those cities, and we know The Economist tells us this, every time it puts Melbourne at the top of the livability index, it does come with a warning that the cities that are in the top 10 tend to be very, very wealthy but low-density cities. New York and Paris and London are not in the top 10. They don't get anywhere close to the top 10, because there does come a tipping point, and I think the people who know about urban policy a lot better than I do will probably give you the micro detail, but it's around 4 or 5 million where cities become very, very difficult to manage. We're already in that space. We're at that tipping point today. Now, in the federal sphere, of course, the Treasury will tell you that they don't want to think about cities policy, but I think they know that they need to. Anyway, they're some top-of-mind thoughts about what the population story is telling you about what your job should be in the next 10 or 20 years, about what should anchor most of the public policy discussion. It's a different order of challenge to the story coming out of the 70s. But bearing in mind some of the lessons of the 70s is it did take another 20 years to bed down a lot of those big headline macro policy reforms. Now, I'm going to talk politics now. I know Laura Tingle's got a speech to give, I think it's tonight or tomorrow night? Tonight, I think it is. So I'll let her talk about the 2016 election in much more detail than me. But I'm going to pose the following question. And this is where I will reference Donald Trump, and I will reference Brexit more interestingly. Brexit's a much more interesting case study for us, I think, than the Trump phenomenon at the moment. I think what you're seeing in the United States, their culture is always prone to a bit of rhetorical violence on some edge that Australia never really goes to. I know a few politicians have felt like they could do that in the past, but there isn't a party base to be able to carry them over the line to government with that sort of attitude. But the Brexit story is an interesting story to me. When you break down that vote, those who chose to remain had a connection to Europe that was not just a literal connection to Europe, but in an identity sense, it was a connection to the global economy. It was actually a connection to the 21st century. So the idea in a London that voted to remain, or a Liverpool or a Manchester that voted to remain, is that their kids would be all right in an Asian century. Now, when I actually look at, and it surprised me when I broke down these numbers, I'll just give you what London looks like today in terms of its ethnic mix. And the reason why I mention this is it's very familiar to people in Melbourne and Sydney. 37% of London today is born overseas. Just over 10 percentage points is born in Asia. 10 of that 37. Just over 10 from Asia, just under 10 from Europe. You're describing Melbourne or Sydney today, which is London. So 5 percentage points are from Africa, 2 are from the Middle East. By the way, the Anzacs, those of us born in New Zealand or Australia, are only 1% of the London population. Now, the rest of England doesn't look anything like London. The rest of England isn't necessarily poorer, on average, than London, but the rest of England, which has a much larger English-born population, doesn't feel like their kids are going to win in the 21st century. Now, some commentators want to describe that attitude as racist. I actually think that that's a very, very unproductive way to look at it. This is more about whether those parts of England feel connected, not just to Europe, but to the globe in the 21st century. And think about how difficult it is historically for the English to decide they wanted to close the door. We're talking about a people that literally were the pioneers for globalisation in the 18th century. Literally. So there isn't a more open-minded people historically than the English, and they're out. They're out now. Of course, the Scots want to stay in, the Northern Irish want to stay in, the Welsh want to be out as well. Now, I look at Brexit, this is why I look at Brexit with this particular frame in mind. Do you think your kids stand a chance in the 21st century? Now, what parts of Australia look like that? We know that the southeast corner can't be that part of any, if there's a hypothetical referendum question in Australia, do you or don't you want to stay an active member of the 21st century? You don't think Victoria and New South Wales will vote yes. Sorry, you don't think they'd vote to leave. You might have a difficulty in New South Wales if an immigration story was run, because paradoxically, even though Sydney has the largest overseas-born population.
John, you're back. What is it now?
Yeah. Well, regarding the treaty and so-called Maori, etc., it made sense in the past for Maori just to go with the flow, and because we were developing as an ethnic group, and ethnic groups absorb other ethnic groups and adopt their myths and symbols and so on, and that was happening. And like after World War II, Norman.
Where did you read this, John?
Okay, well, anyway, yeah, so what I was going to say, and then, like in the 1970s...
No, what were you going to say, John?
I was going to talk about... I was just going to mention Norman Corwin visiting New Zealand.
And who's he, John?
He was a famous CBS guy. And he went on that. They went on the One World Tour all around the world, and
when?
New Zealand was, I think it was 1946.
What about?
And okay, so crossed the Tasman on a flying boat, and they were going. He went.
Yeah. What has that got to do with the Treaty Principles Bill, John?
Well, he was saying that we were at peace with our minorities, and I'm saying that was the 1970s.
Where did you read this, John?
Well, where did I read what? I listened
about this completely irrelevant guy who threw across the Tasman in a flying boat.
Well, no, it's not. It's not irrelevant. I'm saying that
John, it is to the rest of us.
Oh well,
You've
sorry.
just got to, John. Look. I feel for you, mate. I know you want to engage.
Well, yes, but what
you
I'm
are the
saying
worst,
is
most boring derivative storyteller I've ever met in my life. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Okay.
Has anyone ever said this to you before, John?
Well, you have to let a person talk.
Oh, John, we've let you talk. You ring a couple of times a morning, John, but all your stories are boring and irrelevant.
Well, you might be right. I mean, I don't know.
Well, John, if you don't know, I'm going to tell you, and I'm sorry, it's a hard truth, and maybe none of your friends and family have had the courage to tell you. But you really need to work on your conversational skills.
Really?
Because you're at great risk of becoming a complete and utter bore. Sorry.
So, okay.
I'm being brutally honest with you. It's from a sense of love.
Well, I was just trying to say that we had good race relations, and then they criticised them, right? Because Maori weren't doing as people on the left.
See, John, you've lost us again, and it's just
people like Paul Spoonley, in his book
it's always in a book, John. It's not like your observed lived experience.
Well, that's how people know stuff. They read books.
Or they live a life, John.
Well, they live a life and they read books.
Mm-hmm. John, do you have a family?
Yes.
And you're married with kids?
Well, I actually haven't got kids, but...
You're married?
I'm married, yeah.
Okay. Right, and you've never been diagnosed with anything?
No, not really.
What do you mean, not really?
Well, no, I haven't been diagnosed with anything.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. Yep, he keeps trying, though, doesn't he? Free John. He's amazing and we love him. He's an interesting character.
This is Norman Corwin. The Dominion of New Zealand was the last country visited in the course of the One World flight, and in many ways it was the most remarkable. Just how remarkable and in what ways you may judge for yourself. As for me, I must confess that when I boarded a flying boat in Sydney, bound for New Zealand, I knew only that I shared the average American's lack of information about that country. I had always thought Australia and New Zealand were close together, but they're actually as far apart as Providence, Rhode Island, and Havana, Cuba.
Healthy small boys get to be healthy big boys with protein. Bread and Better is a great way to get high-quality protein. Bread and Better, that's what healthy boys are made of.
John, please pass the better peanut butter.
Bread and Better, that's what healthy girls are made of, too.